Welcome, tabletop gamer and X-Men fan. I understand you're excited about Marvel United X-Men, appropriately so. And yet, who are all these characters that weren't in the '90s animated series that you may have seen or haven't been in the X-Men movies? This is a little overview of a look at all these really exciting characters for us passionate X fans. Why we're really excited to see them, and I'll share a bit of context of where they appear. You can see different content from myself on Board Game Geek, Michael, and explore intersections in videos pertaining to philosophy and pop culture. In True Beauty is Good. You can search for that on YouTube. So on to the excellent content that Cool Mini or Not is providing and sharing for us in this Kickstarter. So to begin with, as kind of an overview, we're seeing immediately characters from X-Force, from Peter David's run on X-Factor. We're seeing a lot of love of '80s X-Men, New Mutants, New Warriors for that matter, and an array of villains across the X-Men's history. Um, so starting with Farrell, she was introduced in X-Force. She's one of the original X-Force members. This is important because when Cable first appears, he appears at a time in New Mutants. Charles Xavier is not in the picture at this time. And he enters as a new teacher with very different methods and very different values than either Xavier or Magneto, who up until this point in time had been teaching and sharing and offering instruction to the New Mutants. And it's with Cable, with this kind of, with a sort of child soldier in training sort of bent, that the New Mutants become and kind of transition to X-Force. Some of the members leave, some stay. There are important narratives pertaining to that. But Farrell is one of those initial members of X-Force. Polaris and Strong Guy. Polaris is a very early X-Men character. She and Havoc, who is Alex Summers, who is Cyclops' brother, they appear quite early in X-Men. This is, I can't cite the exact issue, but this is around like 40 or something like that. Certain, this is Silver Age X-Men. I want to say that Roy Thomas is writing. At this time, they decided they did not want to be part of the team. They did not want to be superheroes, but they're still mutants. And they definitely end up, both Polaris and Havoc end up assisting in and coming up in different X-Men storylines for a considerable amount of time. They both eventually end up as regulars on different team rosters. And in particular, in seeing Strong Guy, where this draws us attention to is Peter David's X-Factor run. Which is a really fun, more interpersonal kind of psychological run on X-Factor. X-Factor as a team is neat. At this point in time, when Peter David takes over, we have Polaris, Havoc, Strong Guy, Jamie Madrox, the multiple man. So the fact that we have other X-Factor characters at this period suggests a strong likelihood that we're later going to see multiple man making an appearance. Quicksilver, interestingly, is also on this team at this point in time, being written by Peter David. So Havoc, we're also likely to see, as I mentioned, Alex Summers, Cyclops' brother. Part of what's interesting here is that X-Factor at this point is a government-sponsored mutant super team. So there's a very different bent on what they're doing. They're both trying to work within the system while also advocating and caring for mutants' rights and issues that are ongoing. So now we have, so that's a bit about Strong Guy. And Strong Guy is also, he's kind of like the Thing in terms of a character. He's kind of crass but endearing, is what I'll simply say about him. Boom Boom goes back to X-Factor prior to Peter David's X-Factor. She first appears in the X-Factor comics that come up when the original X-Men are brought together for the first time in a new team as X-Factor. This comes up shortly after Jean Grey comes back from the dead for the first time. And the original X team is prepared. They encounter a number of other mutants who end up kind of palling around with them. Let's see, Rusty Collins, Skids, later in these characters, Boom Boom. They're kind of younger mutants that X-Factor at the time is kind of teaching to. They're acting somewhat in a capacity like Xavier's school. It is different, but there's similarity there. And then these characters end up continuing in different X teams, especially Boom Boom ends up becoming a regular in X-Force and has ongoing appearances throughout different X titles. Longshot and Dazzler, two very cool mutants, prominent members of the X-Men in the 80s. Longshot comes from the same universe as Mojo, the bulbous kind of gross reality TV villain. So one, the fact that we have Longshot here means that we are almost, there's a strong likelihood that we will later see Mojo come up. So Longshot is very much, in an adventure, it's very performance kind of oriented because he partook in basically reality TV. Dazzler is the mutant rock star. Her powers are sonic in nature. I think that it's her first appearance in X-Men. She comes up in the Hellfire Club Phoenix saga, Dark Phoenix saga story arcs. As someone who's performing at the club, and this is when the X-Men first meet her. And then she ends up having periodic appearances and eventually later joins the team. Next we have Sunspot. We'll talk about Sunspot and Magic. These are both members of the New Mutants. So Sunspot is an original member of the New Mutants. The New Mutants is the first additional X team to be created. This happens in a period where the original X-Men are, if recollection serves me right, they are actually in outer space, embarking on the whole Brood saga, as it is called. And in that time, Xavier feels the need to prepare another team of mutants. In Sunspot, whose powers he absorbs the powers of the sun. Brazilian soccer player, very great character. He has a complicated history transitioning from New Mutants to X-Force and narratives at that time. And he continues to be a regular and important character. Magic, Illyana Rasputin. Magic is the sister of Colossus. Magic has one of the most complicated, some might say convoluted, histories of all characters in comics, X-Men, comparable in complexity to Cable. So Magic. She grew up on the same farm with Piotr Rasputin. Peter, of course, leaves Russia, comes to the United States to join the X-Men. At a later point in time, I forget the inciting incident of why Illyana comes to the United States to stay with Colossus. She does. She is growing up and is kind of palling around Kitty Pryde, and they become fast friends, though at this point in time, Illyana is very young, but they become good friends. Then there's an incident where Illyana she goes through a portal and is captured in limbo and is living as the hostage apprentice of Belasco, the demon leader of limbo at this time. So she grows up in limbo, and this either influences or it's coincidence that as she grows up and develops mutant abilities, she has the ability to manipulate portals by passing through limbo, that dimension, for the purpose of teleportation. And then there's giant story arcs. If you're familiar with Inferno, is a whole confluence coming together of big narratives involving Magic as the Dark Child and Madeline Pryor, the Goblin King, It's a big thing. Firestar, original member of New Warriors. She is a mutant. I don't actually know all that much about Firestar, but she um, long-standing appearances in Marvel Comics. Warpath, original member of X-Force. He is the brother, James Proudstar is the brother of John Proudstar. John Proudstar is important along with Sunfire because John, Thunderbird, and Sunfire were amongst that team of mutants that Xavier brought in Giant Size X-Men #1 to be followed by X-Men 94. This is the not yet Chris Claremont writing, but this is really the beginning of Chris Claremont's run. This is the new international team of mutant superheroes that was created as the X-Men reboot. The history in terms of X-Men's publication from about issue 66 up until 93, these issues of X-Men were other Marvel titles receiving X-Men covers and then coming out, so that there was some representation of X-Men comics, but these weren't specifically written as X-Men. The comic wasn't in current production as its own title. So this reboot was somewhat of a gambit. Clearly it paid off. So it's at this time that Thunderbird and Sunfire are coming into play as part of this new international team. Of course, this is also where and when we get Banshee and Nightcrawler and Storm and Wolverine. So both Sunfire and Thunderbird come into the X team at this time. Some unfortunate events befall Thunderbird, but decades later, his younger brother, James Proudstar, ends up actually being recruited by Emma Frost in the Massachusetts Academy. The Massachusetts Academy, they are a rival school for mutants. And the students of the Massachusetts Academy under Emma Frost's tutelage end up battling with the New Mutants somewhat regularly. And James Proudstar, Warpath, is initially part of that group, and eventually he joins X-Force. Phoenix, this is the daughter of Scott Summers and Jean Grey. Pausing this. This is Rachel Summers. Rachel Summers is from the future that is known as Days of Future Past. She is in that future. She is assisting Kitty Pryde, and it's actually her psychic powers that project Kitty Pryde back in time and really give us the whole events of Days of Future Past. So at this time, Rachel Summers, she is not yet known as the Phoenix. She does end up with the Phoenix powers. Surprise, surprise, given that she's both the daughter of Jean Grey, and the fact that this is her name, this should not come as a surprise. In the Days of Future Past future, she's controlled by anti-mutant organizations, and she works as what is called a hound, a mutant tracker for the people that are hunting down mutants. So she has a very tragic and really challenging upbringing. So that as a basis for her coming back to the present day. There's a lot going on there when she enters into Marvel Comics. And she first appears around issue 1, in the issue 180s in there, and it takes some time for her to really be a little time for her to be a more regular character in her appearances, but she ends up being a particularly prominent member of Excalibur. So the fact that we see her means that this might suggest we're going to see future additional members of Excalibur. Nightcrawler and Kitty Pryde end up later becoming members of Excalibur. Captain Britain, of course, is kind of the poster child for Excalibur, being the British mutant team. Talking about Wolfsbane, Wolfsbane is one of the original New Mutants. So again, along with Sunspot, one of those members of that first group that Charles Xavier recruits after. The Shadow King, and we'll speak about Legion a bit in tandem with each other. The Shadow King is a ongoing, very psychic villain. There are always mind control storylines, and he ends up being exceptionally difficult to defeat. The Mirror Island saga is one of my favorite of the early 90s, is one of my favorite narratives with Shadow King, and the way that X-Men, X-Factor, X-Force, kind of everybody ends up working together to be able to defeat him is very cool. Shadow King also has a complicated history with Legion. Legion is the child of Charles Xavier, and his mother's name is escaping me at this moment. Gabrielle Haller. Gabrielle Haller. She's Israeli. Gabrielle Haller and Xavier originally met in Haifa, Israel. It's during this time that Professor X, that Charles and Eric Lencher, Magneto, really, that they end up meeting each other in building their friendship, discovering that one another are mutants, and both discovering their similarities and their differences. So that's a bit about Legion as its powers, of course, having multiple personalities, and each one has a different power. So this is where you end up with that split sense of self and sense of powers. So that's Shadow King and Legion. Callisto is the original leader of the Morlocks. The Morlocks are a mutant group who dwell underneath Manhattan. They're in the sewers. Amongst what I appreciate about the Morlocks is growing up in the 90s, I attribute this really introduced this idea of passing privilege to me. That there are mutants who can pass for human, that can choose to not every minute of their life live as a mutant, because they can pass for human, for being non-mutant. Well, this is a privilege not enjoyed by many mutants, and the Morlocks are this group, and Callisto is their leader. There's an early battle for leadership over the Morlocks, where Storm has a famous fight with Callisto. At this time, she is rocking her mohawk and leather jacket and such. So having that exclusive version of Storm to be able to fight Callisto is very cool. Deathbird. Deathbird is the sister of the Shi'ar Empress Lilandra. The Shi'ar, the Empress Lilandra, these are pivotal for the original Phoenix saga, not the Dark Phoenix. You have to have a Phoenix saga before there can be a Dark Phoenix saga, or at least some might think so. So Deathbird is Lilandra's sister, who's ever plots to take over the throne. She's an awesome villain. I want to say that she first actually appeared, her very first appearance. Well, it's probably an X-Men, but she's a notable villain of Miss Marvel Carol Danvers, as well as a huge villain throughout the Brood saga. Later in the Rise and Fall of the Shi'ar Empire, that's written by Ed Brubaker. This is a really fun run that incorporates into War of Kings with Inhumans and Guardians of the Galaxy and all that stuff. Arcade is he's a very classic X-Men villain. He's appeared a lot. He creates Murder World. This is a murderous amusement park with robots and stuff that are like robot versions of the X-Men and other villains and such. And he creates elaborate death traps that he likes to see if can kill people. So he has this playful quality to him while being, utterly maniacal. Lady Deathstrike, an early acquaintance lover of Wolverine. Of course, she has adamantium-laced couldn't quite say skeleton because they're different, their claws. So long history with Wolverine. Good chance you have some familiarity with Lady Deathstrike. Sauron is a very early X-Men villain who becomes Sauron in the Savage Land. He was a doctor, Carl Lycos. The name Sauron you may recognize from The Lord of the Rings. It is purposefully drawn from The Lord of the Rings. The character Carl Lycos was a fan of The Lord of the Rings. This gets mentioned in the comic. He has hypnotizing powers. He has had regular appearances in X-Men for pretty much through the years and decades. Emma Frost mentioned a little bit earlier. Of course, she's a member of the Hellfire Club. She's very known to many of you who are out there. When we first meet her, she is part of the Hellfire Club, but her history and the range of her role in relationship to the X-Men has a lot of nuance and really develops and shifts and changes a lot over time. Because of course she begins as a complete villain unto the X-Men, later as a rival and more villain-like, but with a greater degree of humanity as she is leader in caring for the Massachusetts Academy. Some tragic events befall her where she ends up being in the care of the X-Men, and this is in the early 90s. So during such events as Phalanx Covenant, this is really when we start to see Emma Frost have a active cooperative relationship and part of the X-Men. And it will be later yet in Grant Morrison's New X-Men that we see such a significant change in the role that Emma Frost has in X-Men comics. More to come. Feel encouraged to share questions that I can endeavor to address more specifically. I'm assume that the characters that are in the core pledge itself, that are part of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, are more known to people. Of course, Toad, Blob, and Pyro, these are members of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. The core box, more known and have had film appearances. Yeah, so throw your questions in the comments. I'll see what I can do to answer them. And if folks ask for it, with further stretch goals, we'll provide some more context and background for all of these X-Men and mutant characters. So until then, take care and enjoy. And you can check out, if you're still listening at this point in time, you may find it compelling, some of the content pertaining to intersections of philosophy and such. So search YouTube for True Beauty is Good, one word. I suggest you start with the Star Wars roundtable discussion. There'll be a forthcoming one on X-Men.